Okay, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming out on this beautiful afternoon. Before I get started, I'm going to just make sure, let's see, goes right there. All right, it's a little windy. We have some boards to display, so we'll just kind of work through that. And also wanted to mention that, you know, as with, I think, what we'd like to do for heavier issues like the police staffing issue last week, like our previous art brief, we are trying to block out a fair amount of time to catch everyone up on all the issues. So this is going to be a long briefing, and we will also stick around for questions. So just want to kind of set expectations for that. And also I want to share that a lot of this, depending on either how much you follow City Hall or what outlet you might happen to work for, some of this you might think is old, some of you might think this is new, et cetera, et cetera. It's really a way that we just want to catch up the public in general on everything to date. And so that's what we're going to do. And so if there's a mix of old, new, and et cetera. Okay, so back in January, we decided to have periodic updates on the status of the art project as a way of keeping people in Albuquerque informed of the progress being made. And today marks the second of these updates. And, you know, informally, we like to call this Project Lemonade. So welcome to our Project Lemonade update. And we're going to go through the same process that we did previously. And so we're going to outline some of the challenges. We're also going to be clear and transparent about some of the ongoing questions and also some of the progress that we've made. In the last press conference, we talked about construction issues, we talked about questions around funding, and we talked about issues with the buses and with ADA compliance and the stops. And we have updates for you on all of those today. Now, we have made some progress, and we also have some challenges ahead, and we have some issues that remain difficult to remedy. So today, we're going to share with you really, I think, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so as we go through that, I want to start with the good news is a lot of the areas that we can control as a city, we've made some significant progress on. The challenge is there are some things that are outside of our control that are going to remain to be issues throughout the summer and on into the rest of the next year, or the remaining of the year. So first, the good news. We've made a lot of progress on construction, and we've worked with our contractors to take major strides in terms of completion of the construction fixes that were previously identified. This means that by the end of spring, we believe we're going to have all the construction issues remedied. These fixes also address the ADA concerns, and we've been working with the community to fix those. Now, we've taken time to meet with stakeholders as well as the ADA community to ensure that this project works for them, and those projects and fixes are underway nearby, just down the street. We have work being done on the Yucca stop to fix significant structural engineering issues there, and work is complete at the Washington stop to fix the issues with respect to ingress that we discussed last time. And our architects are also working on a plan to try and do what we can to fix up the stops a little bit, even from an aesthetic standpoint. That has to do with signage, it has to do with railings, it also has to do with windscreens, and hopefully some localizing of the stops in terms of artwork and so forth. So we'll have more on that one probably in our next update. Now, the next thing that I want to touch on is really, I think, some unfortunate news that is not new to folks who've been following this project, but we get so many questions about the funding. I'm going to kind of step back and let everyone know where we're at in terms of funding. And as folks know, we had several letters from the FTA with respect to no prejudice for the project. I'm going to touch on what those actually mean. Also, I was able to meet personally with the FTA in Washington and get their perspective on our project. And so here's what we have learned. Contrary to perhaps, I think, some of the perception that has been out there, and also to confirm some of the suspicion that has been out there, we know our project meets FTA guidelines for their grant, and that is the good news. Unfortunately, to be clear, funds were never guaranteed. That was simply never the case. I'm going to speak to sort of what did transpire, but I think this notion that somehow we're just waiting for guaranteed funds is factually inaccurate, and it always was. So, for example, if you look at the letters, these are the letters from the FTA starting back in June, and then there's another one in July, and then there's another one going back to December. They all have a sentence that I'm going to read to you in here that is very, very important. And I want to remind you that these letters date from 2017 going back to 2016, all the way back to 2015, and all three letters contain the same sentence. The authority to incur costs provided in this letter does not constitute an FTA commitment that future federal dollars will be approved for this project. That means funds are not guaranteed. So you guys can look at these letters if you want after. Again, given the dates I shared with you, this should be old news. I think unfortunately for our community, it seems new. But that was always the case with the projects. Now, what we are doing is we're proceeding under the FTA guidelines so that we are in compliance and that we are ready to apply for funding as soon as it's authorized as part of the budget process in DC. So there are lots of details on this. We'll take questions after, but in short, here's how it works. We already got a big chunk of money in the last budget allocated for our project to the FTA by Congress. That money is not going to be released by the FTA until the subsequent budget with the rest of the funding is passed. That is the same budget that is being held up that we read about in the papers all the time. So the timing of the availability of funds is tied to that federal discussion. Our legislators, our Congress folks have been working with us, all our senators and our representatives, to communicate to the FTA that these funds are critical for the city of Albuquerque. And so those letters are also available, and they've done that. Now, here's the issue. If that budget passes and the money which is in the current drafts is in there, the FTA now has all the funding that we were hoping to get. That does not mean they will actually give it to us. We will make sure and apply, and we'll make sure our application meets all their criteria, but it will always be the FTA's choice on whether or not to fund this project. And that choice has yet to be made. And so we are hopeful, we are optimistic, but there is nothing for certain about federal funding going forward. Now, with respect to how this project has been funded to date, as we've stated on a couple of occasions, our city is essentially, and again, this was something we inherited from the previous administration, we have fronted $95 million for this project. And we've done that using GO bond money. So at some point, we are going to have to either pay that back or forego future projects. But those checks have already been written. They were written a long time ago. And so our city has to live with that, whether we like this project or we don't. The bill is going to come due eventually to the city. Hopefully, we'll get a budget passed at the federal level. The FTA will decide to fund the project because they've always looked favorably upon it, and we won't have any issues. But if not, I know our team is ready to come up with options if we need to. And so that's why also our CFO, Sanjay Bhakta, is here and available for questions around financing. Okay, now I want to move on to, and so also, you know, in construction terms, this means we really built the project on spec. That's how we did this. And we did get those letters which say that the concept of the project and the details of the project mean that we're going to meet the grant criteria. But again, as I also shared, we were repeatedly told by the FTA that these funds are not guaranteed. Now, I think the biggest challenge with respect to uncertainty, and so unfortunately this is probably the sort of ugly part of the good, bad, and the ugly, is we continue to work with our contracted bus company on the bus situation. So with respect to the buses, on Friday, March 2nd, we did send a letter to BYD, the A.R.T bus manufacturer, letting them know that we will be sending back 6 buses that they brought us over the weekend of February 18th. And Lawrence Rael, our COO, is going to go over the significant issues behind that and reasons why. But one of them are the cracks that are appearing in the back of these buses that you can see right here. These are brand new buses. There should be no cracks in the frames. But there's other issues that we're going to highlight for you that as part of the contract with BYD, and this happens with large orders, we're going to send a few back because we want to make sure that we get the buses that we want that are going to last for the future. And when we see these issues happening right away, we are going to take advantage of the contract provisions that allow us to send these buses back. Now, the A.R.T system was specifically designed for this type of bus. So every issue that we have with the buses does create a longer and longer implementation date for actually getting A.R.T up and running. And so that's why this continues to be a moving target. And we are confident that at some point this year, we are going to get A.R.T up and running. But anything more specific would still be premature until we can understand when exactly we are going to get fully operating buses that meet all the specifications that we outlined in the first place. So now I'm going to hand it over to Lawrence Rail to go into some of these specific details, and then we'll come back and wrap things up. Lawrence? Just watch the wind a little bit.
Yeah, no question about it. Thank you, Mayor. Let me go into the details of the buses the Mayor just referred to. So bus number 1713, and remember 17 is the year, 13 is the number of buses, or is the number of the bus, so you get a perspective of this. Developed 2 cracks on the back covering, as the Mayor described, on this back covering, and it was sent back to the plant. When the bus was then transported to Albuquerque, it developed additional cracks. So that's one of the issues with that particular bus. Also, leaks on the wheel hubs of bus number 1715 and 1716 were obviously when they arrived here, we had leaks in the hubs. It's the same issue that has been plaguing a lot of the buses that we received on the original bus order. Furthermore, we plan to send back bus 1701. That was the first bus that was brought to Albuquerque. This bus was actually manufactured on a completely different chassis than the rest of the bus order, and that has always been the case, that bus would be sent back to BYD. Regarding buses 1702 through 1710, several critical issues still need to be addressed. They include the following. Cracks have developed on the rear portion of 7 of the 10 buses. Again, the panels in the back. The radio systems have been delivered in pieces. These are radio systems that go in the buses, have been delivered in pieces when they were supposed to be delivered as kits, if you will. Kits that would be obviously put into the buses as a kit, not in the pieces. Cracks in the lower part of the battery boxes still exist on some of the buses. They are set to be fixed by a local body shop as we find them. We talked about this at the original press conference back in January, where the actual battery cases are held. The bus itself is cracking inside the cab, if you will. The quantum wheelchair restraints on some of the buses still need to be moved away from the aisles because they are not uniformly located in the same position. Again, this was an issue that we raised before, and some of the buses still have not been fixed for that issue. BYD has said that they plan to send 4 more buses this week as soon as the seat frames and the inserts arrive at their plant. However, we will not take delivery of these buses until the issues with the other buses are resolved. One good note, we have found a solution to the problem of the sliding mirrors hitting the poles of the A.R.T stations. BYD needs to install adjustable brackets to the A.R.T buses so that the mirrors can be moved closer into the bus, so that way we don't have the issue with the mirrors hitting the poles of the support structure. Some of the other issues with the buses are maintenance manuals have not been provided by BYD despite our request and as required by the RFP. Operational manuals have not been provided by BYD despite our request and required by the RFP. A list of specialty tools required for our folks here at the shops to maintain the buses have not been delivered as required by the RFP. Part lists of buses remain incomplete despite requests for the complete list, again as required by the RFP. Most recently, the bus articulated joint, which is a joint that is right at the, if you will, right where the buses turn, the 2 sets of buses, if you will, or the 2 joints. That issue is being worked on and was supposed to have been completed and sent to a testing facility so that then it could go to Altoona to see if it would pass the Federal Transit Administration's durability test. We were told that that bus, the test bus, was going to be sent to Exnova or Indiana for review, and then ultimately to Pennsylvania back in January. As I understand it, even as of this afternoon, that bus still has not reached the Altoona testing facility in Pennsylvania. 2 weeks ago, as it relates to the charging stations, which are those facilities right here next to this bus here to my right, a TUV inspector, a third-party inspector that was hired by BYD to come and certify the stations, basically signed off on the facility itself as certified. However, the wands, which are the actual handles that our employees will use to plug into the buses, have not been certified. Those the wands themselves have been sent or are being manufactured in China, and we expect that those wands, according to BYD's schedule, may not be certified for about 12 to 10 weeks. So we're still don't have a fully certified charging facility. BYD has failed to meet its own deadlines for delivery of these buses in a complete fashion. There has been a moving target for over 5 months. I, under the direction of the mayor, met with BYD, asked them to give us a specific timeline of when these buses were going to be delivered back in January. Their own timeline was that the buses would be delivered by February 22nd, all the buses, and that the charging facilities will be charged and certified by February 15th. Well, they have not met either of those deadlines, and to date, we still don't have all the buses here, although be it that the 6 that they did send, we are sending back. Also, based on intermittent testing that's been done that we did early on, we still have a concern with the range of the buses in terms of the range of the batteries. Our RFP indicated that we needed the buses to have a range of 275 miles. We are still somewhere between 200 and 210 miles, so that creates a real issue for us operationally. As to the construction and the fixes in the construction schedule, let me step aside here and show you on the boards what has happened. And as the mayor's indicated, so we've taken the liberty of putting these on board so that you all can get a sense of what they look like. These were the issues that we cited in our first press conference with you all about the status of the project. And let me go through these individually. First of all, the queuing at the Coors and Central intersection was such that the bus could not make through the intersection in a safe and timely manner. As a result, the contractors went back and readjusted the queuing systems, and now the queuing system has been moved up, and now it appears that we are having enough time to get to the intersection. The second piece is the cross slopes of the A.R.T lane at Atrisco is one that was an issue because the bus was not level enough to get to the platform. So as you can see now, our contractors have gone back in there, and that is a work that's in progress right now. They are actually taking the entire roadway section out and putting in new asphalt and new concrete that will meet the requirements so the bus now sits perpendicular to the platform. As we go here to the station height, that issue is for the most part resolved. We did run a bus this weekend on a very limited test gauge to see one of the buses that we'd run originally. Most of the platforms now are in good shape. There's 2 or 3 of them that need some minor work with asphalt to get them to the right level. For the most part, it's been completed. The length on the turn at the Washington and Highland station was a real critical issue. That issue now has been resolved by moving the queuing area on the eastbound lanes of Central, so that now the buses have a longer, if you will, distance between the stop sign or the lights here and the actual facility, the platform, so they can make what we talked about before, was that S-turn to get into the station adequately, and it now meets the requirements. The available space for the turns on the southbound lanes on Central and Louisiana, we had some real concerns about that issue, because if you're going south on Louisiana and they have to make a turn to go west on Central, we were nervous about the bus being able to get to the platform. We've in fact now verified that there is enough room there for the bus to make that turn, so that issue has been resolved. The platform width at the stations, is now has now been addressed as it relates to ADA compliance. Now we have had our folks go out and look at all the platforms. These circles represent what would normally be an ability for a wheelchair to make a turn on the platform. Again, the Louisiana station is the narrowest platform that we have on the system. We're going to move some of the tactile strips along the area, move them in a bit, so that way the tactile strips don't interfere with any of the ADA issues for folks that were on wheelchairs. But again, it appears that now meets the requirements for ADA accessibility. The bus canopy and the mirrors, those have been resolved. And then the bus docking and access, again, that is an issue that is still an issue that has not been completed. That issue relates to the fact that the buses need to be within 3 inches of the actual platform for level boarding as required by the FTA. And we are working to resolve that issue. That issue still has to be, we may have to make some modifications in terms of the buses themselves to be able to get to the platforms, and that's still not a completed issue. For the most part, all those issues have been addressed. Another one that was a real concern for our ADA community, and quite frankly for anyone using the platforms, and one that the mayor had talked about, and that is the issue of the wayfinding. So when you get to the platform right now, and as you see them, there's really not any signs that show people how do you get to the south side of Central versus the north side of Central. So now we've incorporated a wayfinding system that will be mounted or be displayed on the actual platform as you walk out of the buses. You will see if you're going to go to one side of Central, the south side of Central, it will be one color. To the north side of Central, it will be a different color. That's really important because in many of these areas, especially the Nob Hill area, we're using what they call these hawk signals, which is our signals that are in the middle of the gap between the two regular street signs or signals. And this will give people a way to find a way, navigate their way off the platform in a safe manner to the one side of Central or the other. Review of the bus approaches of the stations, we're still working on that. The mayor had a concern with windscreens and adding additional amenities. We're still working on those so that we can make the, if you will, have amenities for folks who are using the platforms. And the last piece is, as it relates to accessibility issues, we've now installed railing, at least on the Louisiana station, so that we don't have folks inadvertently stepping back and maybe falling off the platform. So there are some safety measures that have been put in place. And that, Mayor, I think addresses all the construction issues that we had talked about in our first press conference. And thank you very much.
Oh, that was taped on.
Yeah, that was.
Okay, so thank you, Lawrence. I'm just going to wrap up this section by sharing a few closing notes. We are in regular communication with BYD, and that is a good thing for everyone involved. We also know that there's already a contract in place with the city of Albuquerque and BYD that was signed long before we got here. So we are trying to work these issues and address these issues within the context of that contract and the obligations on both sides. And so we are looking at all different options that are available within the contract to get this project up and running. And right now there's a lot of different ideas that we're thinking through in terms of types of buses and different delivery dates and other options for suppliers. So we're looking at all those options right now, and that is really going to be the task for us in March and April, is to work with BYD to figure out how we can get a concrete timeline to get all of this completed so that we can actually become operational. Along those paths, we are making sure that all of our paperwork and so forth for the grant application is in order and in line. And so as soon as there's a federal budget passed, we will at least be able to get a decision from the FTA, one way or the other. We hope it's going to go favorably, but we hopefully will get some certainty on that when we actually get a budget passed. Now, I want to close with a couple of additional points. One is that we have a new transit director coming on. And so we announced him earlier as part of a few others. Thanks, Ben. The wind kind of shifted our papers there. So Bernie Toon, no relation to Altoona, Pennsylvania, Bernie Toon is going to be our new director of transit, and one of the reasons why he was selected was navigating the federal bureaucracy, and also a career's worth of managing bureaucracy and administration in government environments and getting things done. And so we're very excited that Bernie's going to be coming on board. Now, as we conclude with our next phase in terms of this Project Lemonade, we're going to continue with these briefings as soon as we have basically enough new information or enough information that provides some clarity to the public. We'll continue to have these, and so we'll aim for somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks and give everyone another update then. And of course, in the interim, if major things come up, we're always happy to discuss where we're at with the project. But right now, there is a long road ahead and lots of work to do, and that's what we're committed to doing. So with that, I think we're actually going to be here for questions. So if you'd like Lawrence or myself, and then we also have our CFO here as well for finance questions. So who would like to start?
Mayor Keller, you mentioned some issues with BYD and kind of meeting the contractual obligations. At any point, would the city consider terminating the contract with BYD and going with a different company?
So in terms of all options being on the table, that is certainly one of them. Now, we have to be careful as a city what we are already liable for in the contract. And so because there's a contract in place, it's not like we can all just walk away without any financial repercussions. So we're going to make sure, especially now that we have a city attorney on board, this is one of their top goals, to sort out what our options are. That's always an option, but we need to understand what the trade-offs are in terms of costs, and also what the timeline is on the other side for BYD to really come through, because that would all obviously make us more willing to stick with the current arrangement.
So, Mayor, you mentioned 16 buses have arrived, 7 are going back, a couple more are in the process of being shipped, but you guys are going to hold off on those until the issues with the 7 buses can be resolved. I mean, how many buses do you need in all to get this project up and running? What does the contract call for in terms of the total number of buses?
So I'm pretty sure I could answer that perfectly, but just to be sure, I'm going to let Lawrence answer that.
So the original contract was for 18 buses that would be delivered to the city, and BYD had indicated that they would give 2 additional buses to be used by the city for up to a year, so that we would get a total of 20 buses. So that's the number of buses that are under the contract.
And is BYD covering all the costs of fixing all these problems with the buses and everything like that?
Well, at this point, the contract requires BYD to deliver buses to the city. And the city reserves the right to review them all, etc. So, and the city will not pay a dime for the buses until they all are certified through the Altoona testing in Pennsylvania. So at this point, yes, they are paying for all of the costs.
One thing that I want to just add on the challenges, there are really 2 sets of challenges. There are kind of assembly, quality control, detail-oriented challenges. And those matter, and we've articulated a lot of those. But there's at least one big issue, and that is the durability of the battery. So Lawrence mentioned this differential between the 275 miles per charge versus what we're seeing now. The reason why this is such a big deal is because if you don't have 275, then we need more buses, right? Because it means we're having to take buses off to charge faster. So resolving that issue is very, very important, and it has to do, in other words, if we can only get 212 miles, we're going to have some more buses. And so we're going to have to understand, of course, we think that should be BYD's responsibility, but, I'm sure the lawyers are going to chime in on that. And that's also why alternative fuel buses of other kinds, whether it's, relatively clean diesel, or we already have a compressed natural gas fleet, if we don't have enough buses to run the route, we're going to have to look at getting some different buses. And so that's also all on the table.
As far as those issues of the mileage, has BYD offered any solutions, or do they understand what's causing that problem?
So I think this is a good one for, we want to, I think, always respectfully not speak for another party. So, I would direct that question to them. It's our understanding that they're optimistic that actually the buses can meet that rating once we agree on a way to test that mileage. But we know what happened when they ran before and the numbers we're getting. So, that's how we feel, at least, about those.
How much federal funding are we waiting on from the FTA?
I believe it's $95 million in total. Emphasis on the fact that there are two pieces.
It's 75. You're absolutely right. Two pieces. 75 from FTA, and the other rest of the money from federal highways.
Yeah, there is. So I think the funding in question is 75. There's 50 in the first chunk, and then 25 in the second chunk that is not yet in the budget that's passed. There's also other kinds of funding that is coming that actually we're much more certain about and confident about, and that's what gets you from 75 to 95. But the real dollar in question from the feds is 75. Is that right, Sandy?
It's actually more. That's 106 in total.
You know what we should do? So this is why we have a CFO here. Do you want to articulate the details on this? Go ahead.
The total funding from the federal government is about $106 million. Of that, the small start grants are $75 million, and there are about approximately 8 smaller grants totaling $31 million. So the total project is $133 million, of which $106 million is coming from federal government. Of that, we have received about $9+ million, and that is from the pool of $31 million grants. Thank you.
That's why he's the CFO. Okay, other questions?
You mentioned looking at other types of buses and options of suppliers. Can you give any more details other than that?
At this point, I think we, because of the way we're doing this, which is in full transparency, this is really sort of our to-do item going forward. And so it would be premature to really go into the details on it. But I'm pretty sure at our next gathering, we'll be able to talk a lot about all the different options.
You mentioned some issues with the timelines. At this point, do you have any indication of when those 7 buses that were returned will be back, and when all of these repairs will be resolved? Is there any timeline in place at all at this point?
First and foremost, those 7 buses are here. So they've not been sent back yet, or company has not taken them back. So that's part of what the mayor described as part of the conversations that we need to have going forward with the company.
So no timeline yet?
At this point, no.
Mayor, can you give us an update on the investigation into kind of how this all went wrong?
Sure. So one other piece on the timeline, what we had done since the last time we gathered on this was outline specific timelines for the company. Those are the ones that Lawrence mentioned that were just not met in their entirety. So that's why we're sort of going back to square one with them in terms of redeveloping timelines and looking at all our options. We tried one set of timelines and it didn't work. So, okay, your question on the investigation. The investigation with respect to how this was all put together and what's being used and so forth, we are looking with respect to the sort of financial encumbrances that are upon our respective funds. And I think we're pretty confident we understand those and at least understand how they operate going forward and the kinds of journal entries that we're going to have to book July 1 with respect to the closeout of our fiscal year. Now, all the other pieces of the investigation, and in fact in its entirety, are being handled by the Inspector General. And as folks know, in Albuquerque, the Inspector General is actually a lot like our state auditor. So they're very independent from us. And so we're pleased they're working on it. In general, that office does a great job. But this is also why they're separate. You should really ask them those questions for details.
Mayor, you mentioned that there was an issue with the battery casings. Why are you guys deciding to go local? And is that going to be an issue with the warranty as well?
Good one.
So the battery casings are, obviously they're located inside the bus. It is BYD that decided to use a local, if you will, a local company to deal with the cracking on those cases. So we've not made that decision. They made the decision to try and address the issue. So it's that's how that decision was made.
Okay, so a couple of things I think to wrap up. I don't see any more questions. Everyone knows Rick, hand wave. Further questions for Rick especially. And Keith is handling a lot of the ART marketing. So obviously, just letting you know some new team members and a lot of the in general in the transit department marketing issues. So just letting you know who he is as well. And I believe Bernie, Mr. Toon, is starting on next week, and so you'll start seeing him a little bit as well. Okay, and is Annette here? Not here today.
Yeah, and that's here.
And of course, Annette's going to continue to be our deputy director of transit as well. So Annette's back there. All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you.